All right, so Senator Joe Manchin, the millionaire coal baron from West Virginia, probably the single most corrupt member of the Democratic Party, at least within the Senate, has sort of been flirting and teasing the idea that he might run a 2024 presidential campaign against Donald Trump and Joe Biden, presuming that they win their various primaries. And this is just laughable for so many different reasons that we're going to get into here. I have this clip that was sort of the biggest indication that he may actually do this. And by the way, he's doing this, of course, in tandem with the No Labels organization, and we're going to get to their absolutely ridiculous platform here in a minute. But essentially, he is giving the indication here that he is seriously considering actually running a third-party campaign because he thinks that essentially Donald Trump and the Republican Party are too far to the right, and Joe Biden and the leadership of the Democratic Party are too far to the left. So we're going to watch this video here, and then I'm going to get into this absolutely amazing quote from somebody who is affiliated with the No Labels organization here. So let's just go ahead and jump into this real quick.
Senator, I mean, we are here talking about a prospective unity ticket. And in all seriousness, as you weigh your options, you've said you're going to decide by the end of the year. Would you consider him as a potential running mate?
John is my dear friend. Better answer. Okay? I think people are getting putting the cart ahead of the horse. We're here to make sure that the American people have an option. And the option is, can you move the political parties off their respective sides? They've gone too far right and too far left. If that movement can move, but that can't be done unless they're threatened. The only way you can threaten is have people out there that says, listen, they can't win, either side can't win without the independent. Without that independent, that center left, center right, an independent Republican, an independent Democrat. If they have another option, then they're in trouble. Those parties are in trouble. So they're going to have to say, okay, we better look at this again. I don't think unless we stay over here that they're going to vote for us. So maybe we can move. Let's see what happens. It's too early. Everyone thinks we need to do something.
I'm going to press you on this because if you do get in the race and you spoil the election, would that factor into?
I've never been in any race I've ever spoiled. I've been in races to win. And if I get in a race, I'm going to win. So with that being said.
Okay, so again, he's basically giving the indication, if I do run, I'm running to win. I think that that's kind of a lie there because I don't think that he actually believes that he has any legitimate chance of beating, Donald Trump and Joe Biden if it was a three-way race. And part of the reason for that, and part of the reason why I think he actually would legitimately launch this campaign is because, number one, his polling numbers within the state of West Virginia within this upcoming re-election campaign that he is going to have to wage are absolutely abysmal, and it looks like he is going to lose his seat. So that could give an indication maybe he would try to do this and then sort of like walk out the back door with some cushy corporate job or whatever the case may be. So that's a potential reason why he may be trying to do this. Another reason is because, he essentially has this misunderstanding that, every single independent within the United States of America is perfectly positioned between like Joe Biden and Donald Trump, which is just absolutely laughable at face value, right? I mean, independents make up a massive chunk of the electorate. They're not all in between the political parties, like specifically center left and center right, as if Joe Biden, first of all, isn't a so-called center left or even a centrist candidate in and of himself. But there are independents like me. I'm a political independent. I'm not a Democrat. I'm certainly not a Republican. I'm an independent, but I'm an independent who's significantly to the left of the establishment of the Democratic Party. But he just like pretends as if that kind of an independent absolutely doesn't exist, and as if everybody is like hoping that Joe Manchin runs. I mean, this guy's polling numbers, he's one of the least liked, least favorable candidates or senators in the entire United States of America. Part of the reason is because he participated, especially during the Biden administration, in eviscerating widely popular bipartisan pieces of legislation, not bipartisan in terms of Washington, D.C., but bipartisan among the American people, right? And that is something that annoys me more than anything about these Joe Manchin so-called centrist types, is they want to pretend as if they are the centrists. And what they mean is they are the centrists within the DC swamp, where we have two, corporate duopoly parties here of Democrats and Republicans, right, who are both beholden to the interests of the billionaire class, of corporate America, etc. And he is in between those political party apparatuses, right? But he is not in between the American people, right? He is not in the middle of the spectrum of the actual American American people on policy, right? You know what's something that is a widely popular policy that Joe Manchin absolutely does not, support or endorse? Medicare for all. That is a centrist policy because it is in the center, the middle of the road of what the American people want. Something like the $3.5 trillion Build Back Better plan that I obviously covered on this channel. He tore that up into a million pieces. If you went even line by line by line of the policies that were within that, right, involving things like childcare and addressing climate change and all of those things, right, you could take it either as the entire package of the $3.5 trillion bill or go policy by policy, and it was overwhelmingly supported by a majority of Democrats, Republicans, and those precious independents within his own home state of West Virginia, which is typically considered to be a very conservative state, right? So if you're against those so-called common sense policies, which is the most ironic part of this because they literally call themselves like the common sense, like problem solvers and shit like that, but you're against the actual policies that the wide swath, the middle, the centrist, the normal American actually supports. So it's just, the whole thing is based on a nonsense premise in the first place that these people are somehow the centrists. I'm closer to being a centrist among the American people than Joe Manchin is, and I'm a literal socialist. Okay, not to say that the majority of Americans are socialists, obviously, but I'm advocating for policies that are widely and overwhelmingly popular. And so it's just a complete lie. This is essentially just the most corporate candidates that would be involved with this kind of a party like Joe Manchin, right? I mean, this guy's a literal millionaire coal baron, accepts as much money as anybody from corporate America, the billionaire class, within the entirety of the U.S. Congress. And so this is just the most pro-corporate, political party, right? And so now we move on to this, right? So Joe Manchin, he's seriously considering it. And this is basically another good insight in terms of how this party views themselves. Here from Daniel Boguslaw of The Intercept. He says, "No Labels board member, if MLK were alive today, he would be aligned with Joe Manchin and No Labels. If MLK, okay, Democratic Socialist MLK, was alive today, he would be in line with Joe Manchin." All right, I mean, think about how completely fucking insane that is for a second, right? He wouldn't even be aligned with Joe Biden, the person who Joe Manchin wants to pretend is like this radical leftist who's gone completely off the rails, right? He would be to the left of either political party today, as he was to the left of both political parties when he was alive, right? I mean, this is a guy who spent his life advocating against, like, the Vietnam War and for, broad social policies within the United States to uplift black and white working class Americans, right? I mean, that's what that's what Martin Luther King actually stood for, especially economically. I mean, he would be dramatically to the left of somebody like Joe Manchin. And that's another, hilarious part about all of this and how he characterizes Joe Biden. It's almost as if they want to pretend like Bernie Sanders won the 2020 election and that the Democratic Party, which is the exact line that Republicans use to attack Joe Biden as well, that like the Democratic Party is somehow being run by AOC and Bernie Sanders. It's not. In fact, the ideas that you are putting forward here that America needs a centrist alternative to the radical left and the radical right, that's exactly what Joe Biden was running on in 2020 against Bernie Sanders and saying, I'm going to be the more centrist, corporate, pro-capitalist candidate in that race. So he's just kind of like stealing Joe Brandon's flow over here and pretending as if like this is something the American people desperately want, right? So they start off this article here. There's a couple different interesting things here, and then they finish off with the MLK aspect of it, but he says, at the No Labels luncheon at the Puritan back room in Manchester, New Hampshire on Monday, literally a back room, a corrupt situation going on in that clip that we just watched there. He says the punchline was hard to miss. A who's who of failed moderate politicians and politicos, including former Senator Joe Lieberman, who we just saw, former Governors Pat McCrory and John Huntsman Jr., and former Representatives Fred Upton and Joe Cunningham, gathered alongside Senator Joe Manchin. They were assembled to tout their political program in the form of a 73-page centrist manifesto outlining the path forward for a moderate American presidency. I'm going to show you guys that manifesto here in a second. It is absolutely glorious in its meaningless, platitudes that it puts in it, but they say neither press nor clergy were seen entering the private event, where in a literal back room, the fading stars of a puritanical third way met to further a plan that they have all but described as political blackmail, which is another interesting part of this. I mean, obviously, again, I don't think Joe Manchin believes he could actually become the next president of the United States in 2024, but this may basically just be their attempt to try to force Joe Biden to the right, even further right than he already is on a lot of these economic issues, and put that political pressure similar to what we want to see Marianne Williamson or Cornel West do in trying to drag Joe Biden to the left at the bare minimum. But they say No Labels cites polling data showing an increasing number of political independents, and thus concludes that those disaffected voters are there for the taking. Okay, so I mean, again, pushing this idea that every independent within the United States of America, which I'm pretty sure at this point makes up like a majority of the American electorate, or at least close to it, it's like equal to the amount of Democrats and Republicans. There's a huge chunk of independents, and they are certainly not all Joe Manchin supporters, okay? But they continue, they say, and for an hour and a half, Huntsman and Manchin played the hits, bringing down the deficit, marginally increasing background checks for gun purchases, and means testing social safety net programs. This is not about me or anybody else, Manchin told the crowd. It's about two parties that have gone to their respective side, the extreme right and the extreme left. Joe Biden, the extreme radical leftist, right? And the middle has been left behind. There is no voice for the middle. The voice for the middle is literally Joe Biden, and I would argue on pretty major policy items, right? He is even to the right of the American people, not in the middle of the American people. And also, his whole shtick has been trying to work with in a bipartisan way, even to the detriment of his own flagship policy agenda items. He is trying to be bipartisan to a fault, to the point where we've missed massive opportunities to actually pass good legislation in this country. That's who Joe Biden is. And Manchin is, again, pretending as if he's like Bernie Sanders or something, that Joe Biden is Bernie Sanders, right? But then another aspect of this that I think is important to note here, right? Notice what they focus on here: marginally increasing, background checks for gun purchases, but then they want to focus on bringing down the deficit and means testing social safety net programs. And that's another big important thing to understand about No Labels and somebody like Manchin, is that yes, they may be more center of the road on social, like social or cultural issues like abortion rights, right? He might be sort of center on the road on that, or gun rights. He may be a little bit center of the road on that, or like LGBTQ issues, but he is not a centrist when it comes to economic policies. He is a far right, politician when it comes to economic policies. He wants to impose austerity on social programs, cut the debt and the deficit, which again is just another phrase for pushing austerity on working class Americans. Keeping taxes low for the wealthiest millionaires and billionaires and corporations within this country. So that's the actual agenda, right? You look at their economics, they're very far right. You look at their, social issues, maybe they're a little bit more in the center, but they want to just sort of use those cultural issues, use those social issues to distract from their extremely right-wing economic agenda. But they finish off here with the Martin Luther King aspect of it, which again is just fucking amazing. They say, as heads adorned with common sense baseball caps, bobbed in the evening light, colored blood red from the Canadian wildfire smoke, I caught No Labels board member Benjamin Chavis heading out of the door, a former assistant to Martin Luther King Jr. So this guy was working with Martin Luther King Jr., so you would think he would know. No, you would be wrong. He says, I pressed Chavis on how the legacy of King, which included broadening social spending, taxing the wealthy, and opposing endless war in Vietnam, could possibly track with the platform presented by the event's speakers, two millionaire moderates. And he replied, quote, Dr. King was a centrist. If he were alive today, he would be a member of the No Labels Party. I moved to remind Chavis of King's words in his letter from Birmingham jail, in which he decried the white moderates as one of the main roadblocks to justice. It's true. Here's the quote. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride towards freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice. And he goes on, and then of course he says that before he could give a response to this, Chavis was whisked away. Okay, legitimately saying he was a centrist. Now maybe you could make some stretch of an argument and say like because he was advocating for like nonviolent approaches for the most part, that he wasn't more in the lane of somebody like Malcolm X, for example. Maybe you could say in that sense he was a centrist, but even then, not really. I mean, the overwhelming majority, if you go look at the polling data back from when Martin Luther King Jr. was at his peak of notoriety at the time, the overwhelming majority of white people thought this man was terrible. I mean, some people thought he was literally a terrorist. The FBI at the time described him as one of the greatest threats to the national security of the United States. I mean, at the time, he was not a centrist by any stretch of the imagination. He was a full-blown leftist. He was a democratic socialist, is pretty much how he described himself. I mean, again, you can go look at the actual economic policies that he was supporting. I mean, he's much closer to somebody like Bernie Sanders than he is to Joe Biden, and even less so than he is to Joe Manchin, obviously, right? But this is how they seem to view themselves. Again, even though he literally wrote a letter saying that white moderates are one of the greatest stumbling blocks, even in some cases more so than the straight up KKK. Okay, so it should give you a sense of how he views white moderates, right? So I know we're getting a little bit long in this video here, but I also just had to show you this interview that was done with the founder of No Labels, because this was amazing as well, where she's actually getting sort of pressed almost from the left here. I wouldn't say fully from the left because we're still talking about NBC, but basically I think think this is a Meet the Press guy who is doing this interview here and pressing on why they won't reveal who their donors are, right? Mysteriously, this organization that is so-called, like centrist and not corrupt and not, in the DC swamp like the rest of the Democrats and Republicans are, right? This party, for some reason, won't tell people who is funding it. So let's just go ahead and jump into this clip here.
This is high stakes. We're talking about the White House here. But no labels, it will not reveal its donors, despite essentially functioning as a political party and registering as a political party in states. So why should the public trust no labels motives when they don't know the donors and they don't know the candidates?
Yeah. So, Vaughn, we've had a track record for 13 years, right? I've been a full-time volunteer for 12 of those years. We started something, we launched in New York City in 2010 with 1,000 citizens from all 50 states on their own dime coming. It wasn't around a personality, it was about an idea. No labels, put your labels aside, come and work together.
Put your labels aside and come and jerk off corporate America and the billionaire class is what she really means there.
Founded something called the Problem Solvers Caucus.
Yeah, they founded this Problem Solvers Caucus. If you want an idea of, the kind of policies and the kind of vibe that they have going on over there. The Democratic co-chair, and by the way, they also obviously have a bunch of, pro-corporate Republicans in this, but the Democratic co-chair of this Problem Solvers Caucus, not sure exactly what problems they're solving, but it's Josh Gottheimer, who you guys might remember, as he was also a huge participant in terms of trying to eviscerate some of the decent policies that Joe Biden was wanting to support. And, I said that Joe Manchin is probably the single most corrupt member in the Democratic Party in the Senate. Josh Gottheimer might be up there in terms of the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives. So let's go ahead and continue here.
That was basically putting leaders together, Republicans and Democrats. I mean, how Washington works, everybody tries to keep people away. We tried to bring them together. We introduced them to the Senate allies.
If I may, because we only have 10 minutes with you here.
Yeah.
This is a presidential ticket, though. High stakes that we're talking about. Why not reveal your donors?
Because the truth is about the time in which we live in. You reveal, first of all, we're not a party. And second of all, we're not.
But you guys are registering as a party in states around the country.
That's just the requirements of the state.
The Democratic Party, the Republican Party, they have to go and submit their donors. So if you guys are registering,
let's talk about what we're doing. We are building a movement at the common sense majority, and we're getting ballots.
Again, no, you're not. Okay, obviously you don't want to reveal your donors because it would reveal who you're being funded by and how that aligns with your pro-corporate agenda. That much is pretty obvious, right? But also, no, you're not. You're not trying to build a common sense majority here, okay? Obviously what she means, again, is like the common sense majority within like DC and that kind of thing, right? The bipartisan nature within corrupt DC politics. But again, if you were trying to push forward with the common sense majority opinion, similar to what like Andrew Yang was running on with his Forward Party and their vague platitudes that they put forward, right? It's the same thing. They're always like, well, we're going to come together and do something that's, the majority opinion of the American people. We're going to be in the middle and all of that good stuff. But then you ask them on specific policies. You say, hey, Medicare for all is supported by the overwhelming majority of the American people, right? Or even a public option for that matter. They're not going to support it, right? If you get into the specifics, right? Do you support raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour or tracking it with a living wage, right? Do you, you could go policy by policy, universal child care, right? Universal free college, student debt cancellation, right? All majority public opinion, support there, and they're not going to support it because they're not actually doing that. Okay, so they continue here.
Access in the 50 states, and we will never run a campaign. This organization, at the moment,
but you're registering as a political party.
But that's just language. That's not, we are not functioning. We are one ticket, one time. A party, definition of a party, is running candidates up and down the ballot. That is not what we're doing.
Your organization, though, in a video posted just 2 weeks ago, stated, quote, "We believe in transparency, not backroom deals. You have no primaries or caucuses. There are rich people that are funneling millions of dollars to your effort. Why should the public trust that this is nothing short of a backroom deal?"
Because we've been around for 13 years. They can see the leaders around us. They can see Senator Joe Lieberman. They can see Governor Larry Hogan. They can see a civil rights leader, Ben Chavis. They can see all the leaders. They can see our work for the last 13 years. I mean, it's all, that work is all light. They can see our ideas, the common sense ideas. I mean, put our ideas out on the table and see the people that are around us.
Okay, so let's, we'll cut her off there and we'll go ahead and look at some of these bright ideas that they have going on over at the Problem Solvers Caucus. So this is their legitimate website, right? This is sort of the policy rundown, I guess. I don't even know that I would call any of these real policies, but sort of just like vague concepts, I guess. But I kid you not, this is their actual sort of like line item, the preview of their policy agenda. So I just want to rattle off a couple of these here real quick and then we'll finish up. They say here, number 1, the politics of problem solving. America can't solve its biggest problems and deliver the results hardworking taxpayers want, need, and deserve unless Democrats and Republicans start working together side by side on bipartisan solutions. Again, bipartisanship is never, universally a good thing or a bad thing. It's not inherently good or bad. It's about what policy you're actually talking about here, right? You can have Democrats and Republicans come together to, like they did the other day, vote that Israel isn't an apartheid and just completely deny reality. You can have them vote on endless wars, and it's obviously a terrible policy that is not necessarily even popular among the American people. So many different, pro-corporate pieces of legislation that are overwhelmingly bipartisan because corruption is legalized in this country, and that is also a bipartisan thing. So it's not necessarily a good thing to just have bipartisan solutions. You can have some that are decent bipartisan solutions, right? If you have some crossover appeal between like a Bernie Sanders and a Rand Paul on some anti-war stance, that can work sometimes, but it's not inherently good or bad. So making that sort of like the formation, the fundamental, goal for your party is just absolute nonsense there, right? So they continue. They say, number 2, our leaders must act now to solve today's economic challenges before they become impossible to solve tomorrow. Whatever the fuck that means. Washington must stop spending so much more than it takes in. From now on, the annual budget should be reasonable and responsible. Again, just vague nothingness, which means our national debt needs to stop growing faster than our economy. And when they say this, are they talking about raising taxes on the wealthy? That's an overwhelmingly popular position among Democrats, Republicans, and independents. Is that the common sense that you're talking about, to reduce the deficit, maybe undoing the 2017 Trump tax cuts or raising them even beyond what they were under the Obama administration to cut the debt and deficit in that way? No, they're not talking about that. They're talking about even worse, more unpopular strategies to reduce the debt and the deficit than even what Joe Biden supports, with things like cutting Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, right? Extremely unpopular, but that's what they say is like the common sense way to go about doing this, right? We continue. Public safety. This one is amazing. Public safety is the highest priority. We need to fix the criminal justice system so career criminals can't keep committing crimes. Let me read that again. We need to fix the criminal justice system. Okay, fair enough. So career criminals can't keep committing crimes. So they're basically just like, number 8, we don't like crime. Okay, good job, guys. Fantastic work over here, right? We'll finish off with these two. They say, and all of the above energy strategy is the best way to lower prices for American families. I wonder why Joe Biden's on this potential ticket here. Could it be that what they mean by this is that they are going to continue defending the entrenched fossil fuel interests that are running our government for the most part and that are destroying our planet at the same time? That's what they mean by that. And they finish off here, it's in America's interest to work with our allies to advance our mutual interests. Again, whatever the actual fuck that means. So, I mean, there you have it. That's what No Labels is, just the most pro-corporate outfit that you could possibly ask for, basically trying to triangulate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, two pro-capitalists, to, especially if you look at his career, like austerity-pushing politicians like Joe Biden and like Donald Trump as well. And basically, they just want to split the difference between two corrupt, semi-right-wing political parties here in the United States. And it's obviously, I don't think, going to work in terms of getting them elected. It could have some impact on Joe Biden if he feels a little bit of pressure from Manchin's potential campaign that could shift him to the right, which would be an absolute disaster and would honestly only hurt him in the 2024 election because he's already losing young people with his disappointments so far on things like student debt or climate change or the minimum wage or free, public colleges and things like that. Legalizing weed, whatever the fuck happened to that agenda item that Biden promised that he was going to do, and then it sort of just disappeared into the ether. So many different reasons why he's struggling right now. Don't know if Manchin is going to be able to have a serious impact on that, but obviously Joe Manchin, again, one of the most corrupt members within the United States Senate, and that's what this political party is essentially all about.
Everyone is saying GoodPoliticGuy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying